The Arabs they represent it differently to each group that they're talking about, as you know. The Arabs versus the Jews.
Maybe more to say the Muslims versus the Jews.
The Muslims versus the Jews. But I think a lot of the pan-Arabism still plays land. That's why they always say Dawlat Arabiya. Like they're always talking about how this is Arab land. You're looking at a massive collective, a massive supremacist agenda versus this time. He was bringing up the example of Timor. We are the Timor in that conversation versus this massive collective.
But they judge people according to the weak is the righteous.
Correct.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. This is Inon Dan Kehati, Jewish Dawa and Traveling Clad. And today we're going to see and mostly hear a very, very distinguished guest, which is Noam Chomsky, who is one of the founders, thought leaders of the radical and progressive left. Let's have a watch.
Very distinguished.
I think there might be an interesting question, the very last one, which I think puts a little bit more puts more emphasis on internal efforts by Palestinians to mount resistance against the Israeli state. So I don't think we've talked about that quite as much in this discussion. So maybe you could address that. This is the question that I'm paraphrasing the question, but Professor Chomsky suggesting that things could fundamentally change if the U.S. demands for Israel to end the occupation. However, the question is asking, do you think that change could happen from within? And particularly thinking about the efforts by Palestinians from within. Is there anything Palestinians can do other than just hope that the U.S. implausibly change their approach?
Palestinians can do plenty internally, just as repressed and occupied people have done throughout history. Let me give you an example which was just discovered recently. Abolitionism. Turns out it's very recently been discovered that Africans initiated abolitionism long before it developed in England, very strongly appealing to the Vatican, which was the ruling league, that was the international legal framework at the time. Back in the early time of the early Portuguese invasion, African slaves were organizing to appeal to the Vatican to ban slavery. They had a fair amount of success up to the point where the Vatican Council at least agreed to reduce the onerous, murderous conditions of slavery. That's the beginning of the abolitionist movement. All throughout history, oppressed, brutalized people have led the way towards their liberation. And the same is true of the Palestinians. Their resistance over the years has been phenomenal, what's called sumud in Arabic, just refusal to give up, maintaining their rights in dedicated, committed fashion. I've seen it personally in remarkable forms in Palestinian villages under attack, in refugee camps and elsewhere. And that can now, the Palestinian solidarity groups in the United States and elsewhere can take the lead in these things, as solidarity groups have done in other cases. I mean, take East Timor, which I mentioned. It seemed almost inconceivable that a little place like East Timor could resist the invasion of a major power supported by the United States and its allies. How on earth could they resist? They did. Amazingly, huge massacre and destruction. Solidarity groups developed in the United States, in England, finally pressured the US government to call off the slaughter, finally did. They survived. Things like that happened in the world. Many, and the Palestinians and the supporters can do it as well.
I must say I have a lot of things to say about what we saw. I'm sure that you also have.
So many.
But I have my top three.
Okay.
Number one, people from the progressive left, from the, I will not call them pro-Palestine, they're more anti-Israel, to be honest. They tend to compare the unique conflict between us and the Palestinians to other places in the world.
Correct.
Like it's the same thing what happened in South Africa and what we have between us and the Palestinians.
Correct.
Also they tend to do this oppressor oppressed, not thinking that about 70 or 80 years ago we the Jews, we were the oppressed actually, and we redeemed ourselves coming back to our land. And this is maybe one of the most critical things I want to say about people like Chomsky. He's a Jew. He doesn't view even the conflict from a place of a Jew. He view it from a place, a universalist place, that eradicate the unique identities of the people, of the actors involved here. Not to mention, as a Jew, he sounds like he has something that represents his people in this, in what he just say. But I do say one thing that I like about Chomsky. The value of the sumud, he touched something important. And I'm going to be going out of line from the usual talking points. I actually also appreciate the Palestinian sumud, the steadfast, that they remain in the land and, with the olive trees and the resilience and connection to the land.
Yeah.
I love that. I wish that we will learn that from them and do it ourselves as well. And you know who does it the best in our sector in Israel?
Who?
The settlers. Kapara alehem.
Of course. And here's the thing.
And that's why I think, and I will end with that, that's why I believe that the settlers are the torch carriers of our people. And instead of boycotting them and not giving them even room in the conversation, they need to be in the front, but that's a different conversation. So,
like, I look at the video, I say an old fart is going to be an old fart, right? That's what he is. He's an old fart. His thinking is outdated. His thinking is not, he's not processing things as they actually are. And when I always tell people to look at the conflict from a lens of how the Arabs represented. The Arabs they represent it differently to each group that they're talking about, as you know. When they're representing it to the West, to ignorant white people in America and Canada and the UK, they'll go, it's Israel versus Palestine. It's the Jews versus the Palestinians. Because Palestinians to them are an ethnicity, right? They're this own native indigenous population. It's a distinct ethnicity. But when they speak to the Arab world, they're not saying it's Israel versus Palestine. They're saying it's the Jews versus the Arabs.
And that's the truth.
And that is the truth. And that's the fight that they're fighting. They're not fighting it as if they're doing... They're never fought... Palestinians have never fought this fight. They've never engaged in muqawama, in the ideals of it's us versus the Israelis. No, it's the Arabs versus the Jews.
Maybe more to say the Muslims versus the Jews.
The Muslims versus the Jews. I think a lot of the pan-Arabism still plays land. That's why they always say Dawlat Arabiya. Like, they're always talking about how this is Arab land. But when you represent that, it's actually the inverse of what Chomsky is talking about. There is actually what's applying. You're looking at a massive collective, a massive supremacist agenda versus this time. He was bringing up the example of Timor, of East Timor, and how they're able to resist. I believe it was Indonesia. Now, look at us. We are the Timor in that conversation versus this massive collective.
True. But they judge people according to the weak is the righteous.
Correct.
And, when we used to be weak, by the way, it's interesting. Chomsky was a Zionist, actually.
Really?
Until I think the 60s. Until Israel, it's interesting. Until Israel was strong, Chomsky was a pro-Zionist. When Israel became strong, we became evil in his eyes.
But we see that with a lot of Jews. They have that, like you like to say too, an inferiority complex. The second you...
It's more than that. I think it's a lack of being comfortable with using power. But, some people that will see this conversation between us will say, yeah, power is violence. No, power is not only violence. Power is also taking responsibility. And the Arab and the Palestinians are very comfortable with power. They want to take control. They want to dominate. For them, it's not something which is unnatural.
Yeah.
For us, it's more unnatural to say, because that's a more deep phenomena that I examine deeply in my book. That because we didn't have sovereignty for 2,000 years, we didn't have to address how to answer the questions of what are we doing once we're gonna have again power and become again sovereign?
I hate to always bring it back to Mizrahi's, but it's just something that I feel comfortable talking about. But when you look at the way that Jews who have a hard time with that power, how they comprehend these things, they're looking at it really of a perspective of this power gives me the ability to kill, to conquer, to do. And like you said, Arabs don't have a problem with that because much of their worldview comes from a supremacist standpoint. They're always coming from a perspective of, I'm above you and you're below me. And my family knew what that was like. Your family in Yemen,
My
they
family
knew what that
too.
was like. We lived as dhimmis. We paid the jizya. When they decided that we weren't Arabs anymore, they got to decide that we didn't get to decide our own fate. So I'm very comfortable as a Jew today to be able to say, no, I'm going to decide my own fate moving forward. I'm not comfortable with you being in power above me in any way, shape, or form. It's never going to be something I'm comfortable with. I will engage in muqawama myself. I will resist your supremacy above me.
Or like I say to them, you think that the jizya is something good? Great, you pay the Yahud
Pay
jizya.
up.
But by the way, being real talk, if I'm gonna be a Jew in a Muslim country, I'm talking about when the rule is fair and positive, paying a jizya and receiving protection and rights and direct connection to the government, it's not a bad thing.
I don't agree. And I'll tell you why. It just, when I look at, and I agree, concept-wise, I agree
Not
with you.
with the concept of humiliation, that you are inferior.
No, but even paying for their protection.
Hey,
like,
but when we pay taxes, for example, to our government,
Yeah. But it's a government that it's been created by Jews for Jews. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but we've seen through the trajectory of time, while yes, sometimes the Arabs treated us
I'm
well.
sorry, Tal, you cannot disagree with me. I'm sorry, you cannot. You cannot
That's when you
disagree
look at
with
the
me.
camera and be like, "That's my channel, bitch." But genuinely, I'm uncomfortable just seeing the track record of how they treated us. Jews would be a fool to agree that living under dhimmitude in an Arab Islamic context, it doesn't make sense for us anymore. The track record has been broken. I just can't trust. I rather 10 times out of 10 give that trust to a fellow Jew to be my overlord or to be my protectorate rather than an Arab Muslim because of 1,000 years of dhimmitude, and we were paying our jizya like good Jews. And we were still, every once in a while, here's a 50,000 massacre in Morocco, or here's 20,000 Jews killed in Egypt. It just happens sometimes. Slip of the tongue.
100%. I hear you. But still, in like in a better reality.
Better
like,
in a perfect
or
world.
in the perfect world.
I agree with you.
But anyway, there's so much to digest, so much to analyze about, this, the concept of what how the left actually see the conflict and how they convey the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Yeah.
And then it's going to be interesting after a while, when I'm going to do reactions and speak about this stuff, what Palestinians say themselves and not how, like Inat will say, how the West planing of Palestinians, like Chomsky does many, many times.
Or infantilizing them.
Oh,
which is the
dearly.
it is the most condescending thing in the world. To
Dearly.
them, to us, to Muslims, it's actually borderline race. It's one of the most racist things you could do.
That's one of the reasons I drink so much coffee and smoke a lot.
Drink a lot of coffee, just don't eat from the baklawa of lies.
Eat from the baklawa of haq, the baklawa of truth. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and ma'asalam.